Welcome to our San Francisco Mayoral Candidate Forum at the Museum of the African Diaspora. This forum is hosted by several of the city's most prominent business and hospitality organizations: Advance SF, the SF Chamber of Commerce, the Bay Area Council, BOMA SF, the Hotel Council of San Francisco, the Golden Gate Restaurant Association, and SF Travel. The aim is to hear from each candidate equally in a neutral setting. We're hosting 5 separate interviews. Each candidate will be asked identical questions. There may be an opportunity for a few follow-up questions per candidate. Each interview is 45 minutes and in front of a live audience. The Coalition of Host Organizations is not endorsing any candidates, and these interviews are being made public for educational purposes. I'm Margaret Conley and will serve as moderator. Let's get started with Board of Supervisors President Aaron Peskin.
Thanks for having me.
What is driving you to be mayor?
Well, that's a good question, Margaret. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm delighted to be here on my 60th birthday. I was born in the year of the dragon, and I am a dragon again. I was born in the year of the wood dragon, and you only get to be a wood dragon twice in your life, when you're born and when you turn 60. I guess you could be twice if you made it to 120. What is driving me, frankly, is 2 things. One is my true and abiding love for San Francisco, a city that I chose to move to 35 years ago from far, far away, 12 miles across the bay in Berkeley, California, where I was born and raised. And the second thing is the fact that I've spent most of the last quarter of a century learning every aspect of San Francisco government, all of its complexities, which I've seen by working with the Hotel Council and the Chamber of Commerce and what we now call Advance SF and the Golden Gate Restaurant Association. And that experience, I think, is what San Francisco needs now. I have actually been, as a person and as an elected official, somebody who tries to find the right policy solutions and to implement them. And I think that's something the city I love needs right now. And that's really the answer to your question.
We're here in downtown San Francisco at the beautiful MOAD. What are your plans for a thriving downtown, for the business community, for residents, for workers, for sports, and for cultural institutions?
Yeah, really good question. As Mayor Breed says, for many, many years, we took all of this for granted. I mean, I've always been profoundly aware from when I first ran 24 years ago, and I said this when I first ran in the year 2000, that there were 2 geese that laid the golden eggs for San Francisco: the tourism industry and the downtown office economy. And I've had the pleasure of really representing ground zero of both of those economic engines. And quite frankly, and I've said this, I didn't say thank you enough, and kind of we didn't have to. It was taken for granted, and now I show up at the 30th anniversary of Lens Crafters on Market Street with a certificate of honor and say, we are so delighted, and stay here and renew your lease. But you all remember, or many of you remember, that I brought everybody together in the relatively early days of COVID and said, what are we going to do about downtown? What things do we need to do? And what can we get done? What's the immediate low-hanging fruit? What is the midterm plans? What are the long-term plans? And immediately went about actually implementing the things that we could do in the short term. In conjunction with the mayor, actually the mayor and I had 2 separate, very similar pieces of legislation for converting downtown vacant office to residential. And I said, hey, rather than do this political thing of our competing, why don't we merge those 2 pieces of legislation together? Although I will say that, interestingly enough, mine was more permissive than hers. I was like, do we really need to require bicycle rooms and bicycle parking in these converted buildings? But anyway, we worked it out and we got that passed, and I think that's going to smooth the way. I think fundamentally, this is an opportunity to re-envision downtown. It's not an easy thing, but with the changing landscape of values, this is a time to actually bring some of the best aspects of our neighborhoods into downtown. And I say that as somebody who worked in an office first at New Montgomery, later on Montgomery at 44 Montgomery. Back in my drinking days, we might have gone to the House of Shields and had a couple of drinks, but if we wanted to have, the evening, we'd go to North Beach or the Castro or the Mission. Downtown has never had those feet on the street after 6 o'clock. This is an opportunity to bring culture and arts. And when we were all meeting, we were all talking about we need to bring culture and arts. And I was like, wait a minute, everybody, this is a fascinating meeting. Let's bring in actually people from the Arts Alliance to talk with. And we did that. And then let's talk about taxes. I was a very, very early adopter of revisiting San Francisco's gross receipts tax structure for the benefit not only of small businesses, and in the current scheme, thank you, all of you really, and I'm looking at the players, for working in a very mature and collaborative fashion to get that thing done. And I know we had one mistake, and today or tomorrow we'll introduce legislation to fix that little mistake, which was literally switching two numbers. The most massive piece of legislation. Every attorney looked at it. We all missed that. But I'll fix that tomorrow and waive the 30-day rule. But also to deal with all of the things that we've learned. Too many schedules, not user-friendly, concentration at the top. All of those things were things that we needed to work out. And we have done that in record time. I want to work collaboratively with all of the players downtown to see whether this is a time that we can get some parks and some restaurants. And yes, we've all embraced entertainment, but we've got a short-term situation and a long-term opportunity that we have to take advantage of.
Public safety is a big campaign issue. How will you protect the public, fight crime, and work with the various agencies like the SFPD and the SFDA to ensure safety in our city?
I have always said, I've said this for a quarter of a century, that public safety is a progressive value. It's one of the most important things that a government must provide to its citizens. And to that end, I think our biggest challenge in the post-George Floyd period that we're living in, and this is not unique to San Francisco, is dealing with recruitment. And, everybody says, well, it's about funding. Well, no, I've got 330 vacant positions that are fully funded, did last year. Right now, it's this game of keeping up with attrition. How do we reverse that? I worked with Supervisor Dorsey, Supervisor, by the way, who I endorsed when he ran for office, to work really on the retention side of that, which is how do we make sure that people don't retire? And as you know, when you have enough years in and you're the right age, you can retire with a pretty good salary. And the answer to that was the drop program. We worked with the mayor and the entire board to deal with the fact that we were not the number one highest paying police department in Northern California. Now we are. But we also have to look at the pipeline. And I've been working with Father Fitzgerald at USF to develop a schools to officers pathway, which holds a lot of promise, where you can, and this is in the face of changing state law, where a degree is going to be required for all police officers in the state of California, where San Francisco will give forgivable loans to folks who go through that, get post-peace officer trained during their college career, which is something that Chief Scott and the department are very anxious to do. You come out of that program with a degree, trained as a cop, go into the police department, you stay, we will forgive that loan in increments over 5 years. I think it has a lot of promise. Father Fitzgerald is excited about it. We can afford it. We spend a lot of money on recruitment and retention, and that is actually a way to bring people from our communities into the police force where they can represent our communities. I have been a huge believer in community policing, and I have to say, when you look at this entire city, I have been remarkably blessed and lucky as the supervisor who has Central Station in my district. And this is 25 years ago when I first started. There were not officers in Chinatown who spoke Cantonese. A lot of the cops didn't know the names of their shopkeepers and their residents and didn't hang out in the cafes. Right now, we have real community policing in the Central District, and that is a promise that has long been made to the rest of the city, that I want to spread to the rest of the city, starting with the Tenderloin, who deserves it and has demanded it the most.
So you've served the public for over 17 years, as you were saying, but what do you say to the people who want change and faster, and that enough is not being done right now?
I would say a few things. First of all, much is made of in this current election of experience versus inexperience. I think it's about having the right kind of experience. But I would say this, which is we know we can do it. We've proven that we can do it. We can do it for APEC. We can do it for Dreamforce. We came together in magnificent ways that we should all be remarkably proud of around the pandemic. Why do we forget those lessons? Why do these things only come up at election time? And the answer is we should be doing this 365 days a year, not just when we have a big convention in town who's threatening to pull out of town. We know how to do it. We just need somebody who's got the stick-to-itness, who is completely singularly focused on being the chief executive of this city. And I'll say this about myself, which is I'm not the kind of elected official who has ever run for the state assembly or the state senate or any other seat. I've been singularly devoted to this town, and the reason I've been reelected 5 times by the people of the northeast corner of this city is because I do that 365 days a year.
Since the Supreme Court's hearing on the Grants Pass case, what is your plan for how we will manage our homeless, unsheltered population?
Yeah, so regardless of how Grants Pass resolves itself with the Supreme Court, I think we have many, if not most, of the tools that we need. And there are many aspects to this very complex crisis. I don't know if you read Kevin Fagan's article recently about Dianne Feinstein's addressing the first kind of encampment, or allegedly the first encampment of San Francisco. But the first thing I would do with the passage of Prop 1, which San Francisco, I was very disturbed when I started talking to department heads and to the mayor's office about Prop 1, which has a lot of money to invest in drug treatment and mental health, and it should be done regionally. We still have underutilized state facilities, not in county, but out of county, that we should be working with the mayors of San Jose, the Board of Supervisors in Santa Clara, the mayors of Oakland and Berkeley and the North Bay, to actually speak with one voice, to spend that capital turning underutilized state facilities around. That's one of the things that I would do immediately as mayor. This should be a regional conversation, and we need that capacity. And so that I was shocked. I called HSH the other day, and I was talking to Shireen McSpadden, the head of HSH, and she's like, yeah, we're going it alone. And I was like, no, we should do this as a regional effort. But if you look at what we've got, we have so many of the answers. We've just got to, it's not an issue of tools, it's an issue of management.
Do you support the clearing of tent encampments in the city?
If we can make a bona fide offer for shelter, and let me say something about shelter for a second. I talked about the changing economic landscape that you are all painfully aware of. You've seen it in the business times. You've seen the properties, whether they're commercial properties, whether they're PDR, industrial properties, warehouses, everything is selling for a lot less money. And while that may be bad for the people who own them, it is an opportunity. Let me just tell you a little story. I don't know if any of you watched this. In September, the Board of Supervisors has to approve any lease over 10 years in duration. It's in the charter. We approved them 11-0. It's kind of a virtually ministerial function. Last September, there was a lease that came to the board for a 10-year lease renewal for 100,000 square feet of public health, human services, Department of Emergency Management, 1155 mid-market. And I looked at this thing on my Sundays because I'm a voracious nerd reader, and it was $64.60 a square foot. And on Monday, I called the head of our division of real estate, and I said, Enrico, would you come in? I'd like to talk to you about this and bring the appraisal. So I know the administrative code well enough to know that he had to do an appraisal because it was over a certain value. He brings in the appraisal, and I looked at the appraisal. I was like, Enrico, your appraisal is $60 a square foot. Why would we be leasing this for 10 years for $4.60 above the appraised value? And he said, well, Supervisor, what you need to understand is, this is a very aggressive property owner. We're already in there. And what you need to understand is the moving costs would be enormous. And if you amortize that over the 10-year period of the lease, we're actually getting a decent deal. And I said, well, respectfully, I'm not buying it because your appraisal is 10 months old, and appraisal is a backward-looking science. And I stood up at the Board of Supervisors and I said, trust me, I'm in the real estate business, which is kind of true. I do water rights, and reject this thing. And they rejected it. Last Tuesday, a week ago tomorrow, we entered into the replacement lease next door at 1145 Market for $29.95 a square foot. And yes, I was proud, and I went home and told my wife that I saved the taxpayers $21.5 million. But the reason I'm telling you the story is this is the time when we actually can afford to stand up 2,000 shelter beds in San Francisco. New York City has shelter capacity for 85% of their homeless population, San Francisco 50%. We can address that. So to answer your question, if we make a bona fide offer of shelter and people don't accept it, yes. And by the way, just so that you know, if you look at the northeast corner of the city, District 3, the district that I've represented, not many tents, almost no tents. And by the way, that's been true under Ed Lee, that's been true under Gavin Newsom, because I've always been very firm about that, and I've let people know that if you're going to get in trouble, talk to me, blame it on me. And that's been the case in the northeast district of the city. If we can make a bona fide offer, absolutely.
Can you share more detail about guidelines around what a bona fide offer is?
A bona fide offer is that the city and county of San Francisco can say to an individual who is on the street, we have a shelter bed for you tonight, come and get it.
What's your vision for city planning? It can take years for small businesses to get permits to open a restaurant at a bar, but carts are allowed to serve food and drinks on the sidewalk. What is your view?
So depends on which carts we're talking about. There are two kinds of carts. There are carts that are permitted by the city, which I have been a big proponent of. It used to be actually very difficult for food trucks and what have you, and I voted for all of those legislation. As a matter of fact, I voted for legislation 25 years ago to allow beer and wine to be sold at sidewalk tables. I've always been for that kind of legislation. But there are also illegal vendors, which are the bane of my existence in places like Fisherman's Wharf, where you have brick and mortar stores and restaurants that are paying taxes and have employees who are on the books, and you have a shadow economy that is not permitted, that is not legal. And you may recall that I was the author. By the way, before everybody gets excited about this, you should all remember that our hands as city policymakers, decision makers, are increasingly tied by the state of California. So all of this erupted after a bill was passed in the state legislature that basically said we could no longer regulate street vending. I found a way around that, which I did specifically for Fisherman's Wharf a number of years ago, which we continue to enforce only administratively, not civilly. Not in the old days, which we cannot do anymore. It was actually a infraction of the law and actually was a criminal infraction. We can't do that anymore. But if you actually go down to Fisherman's Wharf, where Rodney Fong saw what blossomed after COVID, that law has worked. What was the first part of your question?
About small businesses getting permits faster.
So, look, I have to say, I always scratch my head when there's this entire conversation about we need more capacity, we need to rezone the city. And I cannot figure out why in an economy where nobody can get construction financing, it still takes 3 months to have a planner assigned for the most mundane types of issues. These are the kind of things that should go on a consent calendar, that should be, permitted for the price of an application. And I always look at the administration and go like, hey, get your executive house in order. That is actually where the rubber meets the road. And I've always been amazed. You have a department now that has less work than it's ever had before it because nobody's building anything, nobody's pulling permits or anything, and it still takes 3 months to have a planner assigned. Like, Mr. Hillis, respectfully, you got to fix that. You still have 200 employees in that department. You're not being held accountable. Your metrics are terrible. No offense. I mean, I like the guy. He's a friend. But that is what we have to demand from the planning department. By the way, before I first became president of the Board of Supervisors, this was 2005, we didn't have a consent calendar. Now we do. Half the calendar is literally 20, 30 items at the beginning of the calendar. Boom. All in favor, say aye. Next. There's no reason you can't do that kind of stuff for the planning department.
Staying on city planning, what about zoning in terms of 6- and 8-story buildings and developing on the west side?
So number one, I have always believed in density equity. And let me just say this. Density is the reason I moved to North Beach. I love the vitality. I am completely used to 3 stories and ground floor commercial. And remember, I have represented for the lion's share of the last quarter of a century the geographically smallest supervisorial district in the city. But it has the same 75, 80,000 people that the other 10 districts have, in places, where I go and I'm like, wow, look at that. The houses don't touch. I think that San Francisco can grow. I think San Francisco can become more dense. I think there are opportunities for that on the east side and the west side. But the trick is to do it not against neighborhoods, but with neighborhoods. And I say that as somebody who has presided over upzoning of San Francisco to the tune of 115,000 units. The Eastern Neighborhood Plans in my second term on the Board of Supervisors, Central Soma, Western Soma, the shipyard that I was visiting with people in this room about earlier this morning in my office, Rincon Hill, Park Merced, Stonestown. There are so many opportunities to do that, but you don't want to do it in a way that creates a long-term backlash. And you've got to do it in conjunction with a community, which doesn't mean that there isn't going to be controversy and doesn't mean that you're going to have to take a tough vote. You're still going to have to take a tough vote. But this notion of a one-size-fits-all planning regimen, I think ultimately is not going to be healthy for San Francisco. And it's interesting, I say this very, very sincerely, that I actually think I am the candidate who is most likely to meet the state's mandates precisely because I have a history of working with and standing up for neighborhoods.
So how are you going to get the YIMBYs and the NIMBYs, the people that want to develop and don't want to develop, to collaborate?
Well, first of all, let me start off with what I said earlier, which is the number one issue right now isn't capacity, it's construction financing. And we're having all of these conversations that went from, and by the way, not of my doing, the mayor completely one day did a 180-degree about face from previous planning proposals to current planning proposals. I don't know if that was a retreat from the YIMBYs or what it was, but it still ignores the fundamental issue, which is you've got 73,000 fully entitled units in the pipeline. Nobody is building. And how do you unfreeze that? How do you unfreeze Treasure Island? How do you unfreeze the shipyard? How do you unfreeze those 73,000 units in the pipeline? And the answer is we got to find a cheaper source of money. And it turns out, after doing a bunch of research and looking at best practices, that your own government, the city's Office of Public Finance, can issue tax-exempt revenue bonds for market rate developers, for nonprofit developers. And the second I realized this, my phone started ringing, and it was Presidio Bay Ventures, and it was all sorts of people who wanted access to this money. And now that I've finally figured out the last mundane, archaic provisions, also a function of state law around possessory interest tax, and have gotten my policy brain around that, we are ready to unveil it, and that is going to unstick thousands and thousands of units that are in the pipeline and provide financing for projects that have yet to be proposed.
Transit is vital for the functioning of world-class cities. Do you support this, and what are your plans to transport people to the heart of San Francisco?
Well, yes, I support this, and I have to say, and I'm not picking on BOMA, but it was funny because I'm filling out all of these questionnaires for different organizations, and I was looking at questionnaires that I filled out a quarter of a century ago when I was first running for supervisor that said, would you support building large parking garages downtown. And I answered honestly and said, no, we need to rely on public transit. And I have been actually the author of any number of measures that have aided the MTA both administratively and financially, starting with Proposition A in 2007, which was highly counterintuitive. It's very rare that elected officials, or for that matter, business people, want to devolve power. But in that measure in 2007, I actually took the Board of Supervisors out of the equation for almost everything that concerned the MTA. If you remember, in the old days, the Board of Supervisors used to approve red zones and yellow zones and green zones and left-hand turn lanes, and I was like, absolutely not. Gave all that to the MTA and changed their funding source to bring them 80% of all revenue from parking meters, parking fines, and citations, which was a huge boost in those days. In those days of a decade and a half ago, $32 million a year. I am the author, which, by the way, I did in conjunction with and collaboratively with the TNC industry, Uber and Lyft, of the tax that taxes per ride. Uber and Lyft and I actually went to the state legislature together to get permission so I could ask the voters of the city and county for permission. I've supported revenue bonds, general obligation bonds, but the reality is we are facing a very precipitous fiscal cliff in the next couple of years, and I think the answer is twofold. One is we have to find additional permanent sources of operating revenue. And the other is, I think we're going to have to be very realistic that large-scale capital investments are going to, for the near term, have to give way to day-to-day operating investments. And that is a big decision, but I think that is the imperative.
Leads right to the next question. Year after year, the city seems to struggle with a $15 billion budget. Do you see the city as having a revenue problem or a spending problem?
Well, everything gets more expensive, but I will say this, which is, and by the way, I'm not scared of, don't get me wrong, economic downturns are no fun for anybody and people get hurt. And by that, I mean, poor people get hurt, well-to-do people get hurt, investments disappear overnight. But I'm not scared of economic downturns. As a matter of fact, this is the third one that I faced. As a matter of fact, right when I got into office in 2001 was .com 1.0 bust, which was a very, very steep recession. And when I left office in 2008, we were in the middle. We didn't know what to call it in those days, but we now call it the Great Recession. So this is my third go around. And you want to know what? It is actually an opportunity to retool things. It is an opportunity to get back to basics. It's an opportunity to choose between the want-to-haves and the need-to-haves. And remember that what are the basic functions of government? Public safety, having streets that are paved well, all of the, making sure that people can respond to a medical incident, to a fire. Those are the basic things. So, I will say this, Margaret, which is in every single year, and this is my 17th time, this government that you should be very proud of has never done what the state government has done. We have always balanced our budget on time, every single year. And also, and I've said this, and this is not a political line, I've said this for 25 years, which is fiscal prudence is also a progressive value. When I started out 24 years ago, San Francisco had some of the most anemic rainy day reserves of any major American city. And I have year in and year out insisted that we grow those reserves. We never knew that COVID was coming, but when it did, we actually had healthy reserves. And since COVID, I've made sure that we continue to rebuild those reserves. That is what a healthy business does. That is what a healthy city does. So I really believe that fiscal prudence is a very, very important value.
You've talked about what we'd grow, but what would you cut?
There are a host of things that are being cut right now. I'll tell you the thing that I really have been very reticent to cut, and that is investment in capital expenditures of every kind, whether it's redoing our libraries, paving our streets, because the longer you delay those, that cost in the out years for that deferred maintenance and that deferred investment grows exponentially. And as a matter of fact, as president of the board, I serve on the capital committee of the city and county of San Francisco. And last year was the only person to dissent because of how little we put into capital. That dissenting vote paid off because this year there were 3 scenarios: a high scenario that was financially unrealistic, a low scenario that was way too anemic, and I was able to get the entire committee to go with the middle scenario, which I'm very, very proud of. But relative to cuts, with the best of intentions, this city has embraced a whole lot of want-to-haves, and they provide things that are important and that people like. But do I need to have a youth commission, which is a lovely experience for 22 young people every year and has 3 staff? No. Can I use this opportunity to consolidate small departments so that they can share their back of house accounting and HR functions? Absolutely. Can the Commission on the Status of Women share the HR and accounting functions of the Immigrant Rights Commission or the Human Rights Commission? Absolutely. Let's consolidate those. There's a ton of those savings that are out there.
Let's talk about the city's narrative. How would you summarize it? And is it real or not?
Margaret, it is both real and it is also imposed on us. And quite frankly, we have also fed into it and exacerbated it. Some of the things that we decry existed in 2019 before the pandemic, and arguably were worse, but we ignored them. We had a raging fentanyl crisis in 2019. Some of them, particularly the spate of Asian hate crimes that happened after the very hurtful and hateful words of Donald Trump, are very real. The increase in property crime is very real. The decrease in violent crime is also real. The mayor says that this is, the best year we've had, minus the year after COVID in the last 10 years. Those numbers are real. Not that everybody reports every crime, but they were underreported in 2019 and they're underreported today. So those are good benchmarks. Part, I believe, of what is going on here, and you may think this silly, is that San Francisco has always been the recipient of negative media attention, national negative media attention, for 2 reasons. One is because of our, lovely San Francisco values that we all embrace, same-sex marriage, you name it. And the other reason is this has been the home of one of the most powerful, most effective members of the United States Congress, who has twice served as Speaker of the House. And the best way to demonize Nancy Pelosi is by demonizing her town. And as long as the merry-go-round was going around pretty well for us, we ignored that. We laughed. We embraced our San Francisco values, and we knew that we were doing well financially. When the merry-go-round slowed down, all of a sudden that started to hurt. But these attacks have been coming for a long time, and we fed them. We also fed them, and we stood up and said, it's time to stop the BS and all the rest of it. I think that, yes, we have to address our homeless crisis. Yes, we have to address our mental health and behavioral health crisis and our drug overdose crisis. And yes, we also have to talk about what is going right for San Francisco. And I'm hearing more and more of that. I have to say that there is a new sense of positivity as I walk around Union Square, as I walk around downtown, as I walk around the neighborhoods. People are saying that they're feeling better about San Francisco, and we've got to project that.
What is your leadership style? As an example, how would you work with the Board of Supervisors?
So let me say this about that, which is perhaps some of my reputation notwithstanding. I am actually a collaborator and a compromiser. And I think the people that I've worked with in this room have seen that on many, many occasions. And I think a lot of the business of politics is the business of working with people, reaching consensus. And there have been mayors that have done that better with boards of supervisors. I'll tell you, Willie Lewis Brown, and he and I fought over policy matters and what have you. When you walked into his office with an idea, he would say to you, Mr. Peskin, that is an excellent idea. I am going to implement it, I am going to work with you, and I'm going to take credit for it. And some of that has been missing. I think that, not again to go to the national dynamic, but I think that some of the national political behavior has precipitated down to and been normalized, yes, even in tolerant San Francisco. And I think I need to be, and I think I have been, a leader who repudiates that kind of behavior and says, wait a minute, I think we can all get in a room and work this out. That's who I want to be.
So a little more detail. Having been elected 3 times as board president, if you are elected mayor, how are you going to want the board president to work with you?
Margaret, thank you for giving me that softball, that's how you get elected board president, actually, is being able to work with colleagues who are to your political left and to your political right and who work harder and work less hard, and helping them be the best that they can be. Saying, hey, this is the right way to get your thing done. Here are the people that you need to meet with. Why don't you come to my office and I'll call Chris right in and we'll see if we can figure this thing out. That is the kind of relationship that I want to have with a board president if I'm mayor. I mean, it takes a certain level of maturity and a certain level of tolerance. And that doesn't mean that at some point, and Willie Brown said this too, your idea is absolutely insane. I'm going to make sure it never sees the light of day. And then you knew that if you pursued it, he would squash you like a bug. So you got to have that too.
If you win, what would success look like for you the first 100 days of the new term?
So I think we've touched on a number of them. We talked about an immediate regional effort to come together to harness Prop 1 dollars to utilize unused and underused facilities, state facilities throughout the region to address our mental health and drug use crisis. What I said about implementing in double time a schools to officers pathway, what I said around actualizing and getting folks to use tax-exempt revenue bonds to unstick our housing pipeline. What else would I put on that list? Untangling the web of, many of the candidates for office are saying this, none of this is new to you. This falls entirely within the realm of the chief executive. Untangling the Byzantine web of 9 different agencies, 258 different providers as it relates to homelessness. There is no reason that the city should be issuing 3 contracts from DPH to a particular provider, 2 contracts from HSA, 1 contract from DCYF. It multiplies the compliance on both sides. We need to consolidate that. And then we can say in the same breath to the providers that they need to consolidate. And I think you'll see efficiencies, you'll see better service delivery, you'll see more accountability, and you may even see some cost savings. Another thing that I would like to do in my first 100 days, and this also, by the way, is not something the Board of Supervisors can do. It falls entirely within the realm of the executive branch, is to reform the civil service hiring system. Last week we had a debate and somebody said, if you could wave your magic wand, what would you do? And I gave my honest, nerdy response, which is the fact that it takes 16 months to hire somebody is absurd. I get it. If it's a cop and you do backgrounding, which by the way, I intend to do while these people are going to college, I get it. But if it is a policy analyst, if it is a nurse, if it is a muni operator, there is no reason that we should be waiting around for a year and a half. And that is something that I would like to do. And then finally, I have a proposal, and you're the first people to hear this, which is not YIMBY NIMBY, Margaret, but us versus them, tech versus everybody else. I think that there are ways that we can not only reduce that dynamic, but we can actually harness the best of tech. And in the same way that New York is the home of international politics and Geneva human rights, I think that San Francisco should stand up and encourage an international center for tech diplomacy. We have, as you know, 3 dozen consuls general here, most of whom, every time I talk to, they are all about tech and figuring out how to make relations between California and the northern end of Silicon Valley and their economies and their countries. It could be maybe located in mid-market, maybe in the Emporium, and it would fill empty office space, and it would bring jobs, and it would attract conferences. And I think that is the kind of vision that I have that San Francisco needs. Yes.
Is there anything else you want to share about your vision of the city of San Francisco, or how you want the world to see San Francisco?
One thing I want to say is that we can't forget our neighborhoods. Our neighborhoods where actually many of our small businesses are, that actually have, for the most part, recovered much more quickly from the pandemic than downtown, which has taken the brunt. We can't forget either, and we have to invest in those. And that's part of the reason that I very early on was interested in raising the gross receipts tax exemption to $5 million to help those businesses. But while we are working to recover downtown, we can't forget our neighborhoods. They are also what makes San Francisco the envy of the world, and we shouldn't forget them either.
Is there anything else you would like to add, Supervisor?
I look forward to working with you over the next 141 days and beyond between now and the election. I have to say that walking around San Francisco, going to neighborhoods from the Excelsior to Terraville, Noriega, Judah, Irving, 24th Street, and Noe Valley has been remarkably heartening. I mean, I think that there is a lot of hope for San Francisco, and I want to run a positive campaign that harnesses that hope.
Well, thank you very much to our San Francisco host organizations, the Museum of the African Diaspora, and to, on his birthday, the Board of Supervisors President Aaron Peskin.
Thanks for having me.